Hello and welcome to P7 Practice to Pass Day 3, being organized by ACCA Pakistan. I am Kashif Kamran, your tutor. Now, the agenda for the third day of the Practice to Pass session is to work on evidence. Till yesterday, we were drafting ethical and professional issues. Today, we'll be drafting evidence. So let's start with the third day of the Practice to Pass session. And let's emphasize on how important evidence is to a 100 marks paper. Now, let me first clarify the nature of question which comes on evidence and the type of question which comes on evidence before we start the practice session. Because if you are unaware of the requirement which comes on evidence, it's very difficult tackling the question and the marking scheme. Now, that has been my focal point on the day 1 and day 2, that you should be knowing the marking schemes because that really help the students writing to the number of marks available. Okay, let's start with the exercise on evidence. Now, in terms of evidence, in P7, there are two types of questions which comes on evidence, and I'll be preparing you for both the types in the session today. Now, if I illustrate that for you, there are two types of questions which comes on this topic. Type 1 question which comes on evidence and a type 2 question which comes on evidence. Now, this type 1 and type 2 is the jargon I'm using myself, but technically there are two types of questions which are part of the P7 paper. If I look at the type 1, which is very common and very oftenly comes in exam, and the type 2 is very rare. It's very rare and comes very rarely, but if it comes, you should be prepared for it. Now, if I look at the type 1 question, which comes on evidence, which is very common and you should be prepared for it, the question requirement is, this is a very static requirement, right? So I'll try to illustrate it. The requirement is comment on the matters you should expect to find, comma, and explain the audit evidence. Explain the audit evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working papers, in the review of the working paper file. Now, that is a complete question, right? This is the type 1 question which comes in the exam paper. Now, when I look at the second type of a question which comes in P7 is different. The second type of the question which comes in P7 is comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence obtained by the team, question mark. These are two types of requirements, right, which comes in P7 on evidence. Now, we are preparing ourselves for both the types. I'll first do our discussion with you on the types, then I'll make you prepared for it, and then we'll go and see an exam paper. Now, if I first look at the type 1, in the type 1, the examiner is focusing on two things, right? The first thing the examiner wants us to do is comment on the matters. 1. Second, the examiner wants us to explain the evidence. 2. Right? So, these two things are very important to score marks on. Let's see what exactly comment on matter means. Comment on the matters, question mark. Now, when the examiner asks you comment on the matters, which matters? The question on evidence contains accounting matters. So when the examiner asks you comment on the matters, So in the case study, the matters relates to accounting problems, or the matter relates to accounting issues. So when the examiner asks you comment on the matters, those matters relates to accounting issues in the case study. The examiner is not telling the subject matter of the matters. It's just saying comment on the matters, but the examiner is not specifying which matters. So that is a very generic statement. So when the examiner says comment on the matters and the question is on evidence, then the matters by default are accounting issues or are accounting problems. So comment on the matters means what? The first comment you will do is a comment on its materiality. So you will comment on the materiality. Is the accounting issue material or not? Second, you will do the commenting on its treatment. You will comment on the treatment. Is it right? Is it wrong? And if you think the treatment is wrong, then you will do the third comment. And the third comment is on the risk of material misstatement, something we did in the class in the day one, material misstatement. Something being understated or overstated. It's same like you do the question on audit risk. It's same like the question you do on risk of material misstatement. Examiner is asking you comment on the matters. So the first comment you will do on the matters is the comment on the materiality. Is it material? Is it not? Then the second comment you will do is on the treatment. Is it the right treatment? Is it the wrong treatment? And the third comment you will do on its risk. What is being understated or what is being overstated? So every comment, each comment is equal to 1 mark. So when I comment on the materiality, when I comment on the treatment, and when I comment on the risk is equal to 3 marks. So see how simple that marks are. When you comment on the materiality, you will take 1 mark. When you comment on the treatment, you will take another 1 mark. When you comment on the risk, you will take another 1 mark. So when the examiner asks you comment on the matter, when the question is on evidence, then those matter are accounting matters. And you should comment on its materiality, its treatment, and its risk. So you're getting 3 marks for that. Then secondly, after the comment on the matters, the examiner is asking you, explain the evidence in the working paper file. Explain the audit evidence. Explain the audit evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. Now obviously you here is the manager. You should expect to find. We know in P7 most of the time the you demonstrate the manager, right, in the case study. So you should know the you, and you should know that the manager reviews the working paper prior to the report being signed. So the manager is asking you a very practical question. Explain the audit evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. Now, a lot of time student gets confused between writing a procedure and writing an evidence, which I will be illustrating today as well. But the question is not asking you procedure. The question is asking you audit evidence, which you should expect to find in the working paper file. Where is the evidence? The evidence is in the file. Now, what is in the file? The file contains papers. The file contains paper. I normally tell students that when you're attempting a question like such in exam hall, assume you have a file in front of you. The box file, right? Now the box file contain all the papers. So when the auditor gathers evidence in the documentary form. And when he gathers evidence in the documentary form, the evidence gets to the file. So the examiner is asking me to explain the evidence you should expect to find in the file. So when I talk about evidence is equal to evidence in the file, the evidence in the file is equal to something which is documentary, or something which is in form of papers, or something which is tangible. Obviously, in a file, if you visualize a file in front of you, the file contains something in a documentary form, or the file contains something in form of papers, black and white, or the file contains papers. Papers are tangible. So the evidence you should expect to find in the file. So what is the form of the evidence? The form of the evidence is documentary. The form of the evidence is tangible. The form of the paper is papers. Obviously, Farooq, you will get to know that the question is on evidence because the examiner would put the requirement. I've just illustrated the requirement. Comment on the matters you should expect to find and explain the evidence you should expect to find in the review. So by looking at that word, it's very clear that the question is on evidence. Obviously, in a question on evidence, the examiner will look at the word evidence. Okay, so evidence is in the file, right? The evidence is documentary. The evidence is in the form of the paper and tangibles. Now, evidence you should expect to find in a file. Now, normally, the student is confused between evidence versus procedures. When the examiner asks them to write evidence, they write procedures. There is a difference between a procedure and an evidence, right? Evidence is in the paper form. The procedure basically starts with an action verb. For example, if I say review the board minutes, review is the action. So review the board minutes is a procedure. But by writing a procedure, review the board minutes, I got an evidence. What evidence? Board minutes. So board minutes was the evidence, right? Because board minutes is a paper. But what I did, I reviewed the board minutes. So if I say review the board minutes, it will become procedure. But if I say board minutes, that becomes evidence. You cannot write action verb before the evidence. The evidence has to start with paper. For example, if I'm writing an evidence, the evidence could be fixed asset register because that is tangible. The evidence could be a purchase invoice because that is tangible. The evidence could be board minutes. The evidence could be the lease agreement. The evidence could be loan agreement. The evidence could be the draft financial statements. See, all these examples are in tangible forms, and all these examples are in paper form or in documentary form. But if I write a procedure, the procedure has to start with a verb. If I'm writing a procedure, I will say review, inquire, recalculate, analyze. See, they're all verbs. They're all verbs. So the procedure means you're doing something, right? So the verb means you're doing something. Action, action. So when I am writing the evidence, I am writing something in the form of a document, right? I cannot write something in the form of a procedure. I cannot write something in the form of a action verb, right? Now, remember one thing, that when the examiner asks you evidence you should expect to find in the file, your emphasis is on what? Your emphasis is on evidence. Your emphasis is on evidence. Your emphasis is not on a procedure, right? So if you start writing procedures, what will happen? You have taken the wrong track. Rather, you have written the evidence, you're writing a procedure. So please ensure that you have a segregation between writing a procedure and writing an evidence. I'll do an illustrative exercise with you to give you a very good understanding of writing a procedure and writing an evidence. But please assure that you're writing evidence when the question is on evidence. You're not writing a procedure when the question is on evidence, right? The last thing. Now, when I talk about the evidence in working paper file, the evidence in the working paper file can come from two sources, right? One source of evidence could be management. Obviously, when I go for an audit, most of the time, the evidence comes from the management. Management gives me evidence, right? If I look at my examples above, fixed asset register, who must have given me that? Management. Purchase invoice, who must have given me that? Management. Board minutes, who must have given me that? The management. Lease agreement, who must have given me that? The management. The loan agreement, who must have given me that? The management. The draft financial statements, who must have given me that? The management. A lot of evidence comes from the management, right? Secondly, evidence also comes from third parties, right? Evidence also comes from third parties, like customers. Evidence comes from the customers directly. So auditor can directly correspond with the customer, yes. Evidence can come from the suppliers. So I can directly correspond with the supplier, yes. Right? And evidence can also come from the bank, yes. So evidence can come from the management, right? The evidence can also come from the third party. But the evidence has to be in the form of papers, documents, from wherever it is coming from, right? I hope everyone understand. Verbal evidence has no importance. The evidence has to be in writing. The evidence has to be in documentary form. So verbal evidence has no value. The only evidence which has value is something which is in black and white, something which is in documentary form. So the evidence from whichever source has to be in writing, has to be in black and white. Now, why am I telling you? Malik Awan, perfect, confirmation letter. And Sana Zahir, AEIOU, that's perfect. Procedure starts with AEIOU. Okay, so evidence in the working paper file can either come from the management or it can come from the third party. Why am I telling you this? Because there is a very important clue in terms of writing an answer. If the evidence comes from the management, I cannot put the management document in the original form in my file. Can I take the original lease agreement from the company and put it in my file and take it to my office? No. Can I take the original loan agreement from the company, put it in my file and take it to my office? No. I need a copy of that, right? I need a copy of that. Because if something comes from the management will not give me something original to take back to the office. The management will say, make a photocopy of it. So when I'm writing an evidence which comes from the management, what will I write? I'll say copy of board minutes. I'm using the same list I used above, right? Copy of lease agreement, copy of loan agreement, right? So as simple as that, when an evidence comes from the management, I cannot put the original evidence in my file and go back to my office. I have to make a photocopy of that, right? And all of you are agreeing with that. I can see your responses, which is good to see. So uh, is everyone clear with that? When evidence comes from the management, the important thing is that I cannot take the original evidence. I have to put the evidence in the form of a copy. So that's very logical and that's very natural, right? Secondly, when the evidence comes from the third party, then I cannot have a copy, because the third party has given me the evidence directly. Third party directly gives evidence to the auditor, directly gives evidence to auditor, right? So be realistic. I cannot say copy of the confirmation letter, because confirmation letter was circulated by the auditor directly to the third party, and the third party directly responded to the confirmation letter to the auditor. So confirmation letter is not the management record, right? Confirmation letter is the record of the auditor. So will I put the word copy with the confirmation letter? No, I'll not put the word copy with the confirmation letter. Same happens with the representation letter. The representation letter is not the management record. The representation letter, even though that is given by the management, the representation letter belongs to the auditor. So I cannot write the word copy when the ownership is of the auditor. I'll only write the word copy when the ownership belongs to the management, right? I'll only write the word copy when the ownership is of the record is with the management. I'll not write the word copy when the ownership is with the auditor. So see, how would I write? I'll say confirmation letter. I'll not say copy of the confirmation letter because the ownership is of the auditor. I'll say representation letter. I'll not say copy of the representation letter, right? So is that clear to everyone? When the source of evidence is the management, then I have to use the word copy because I cannot put original in my file. But when the source of evidence is the auditor, then I cannot put the word copy because it's my document. Okay, let me take some quick questions. Shabrez Alvi. No, we need the original confirmation letters as the one specific arranged for the auditor. Perfect, right? Shabrez Ali Raza. Recalculation of depreciation expense should be in the working paper file as the evidence. Yes, Ali Raza, I'm coming to that. Himraj, the work done by the auditor, such as attending inventory counts, would have documented this procedure. How do we say this in an evidence? Perfect. Ali Raza, Himraj, that is perfectly the point I was just about to come to. So give me just 2 minutes and your problem would be resolved. Okay, now two things we were discussing, right? Evidence comes from the management, one. Evidence comes from the third party. And what about evidence, source of evidence, which is obtained directly by the auditor himself? There are so many things which the auditor do himself. Suppose he goes to the inventory count. Now, if he goes to the inventory count, what evidence will he have in the file? Or if he go and have a meeting with the management, what evidence will he have for the meeting? If you inquire management, that is a procedure, right? But what evidence will you have that you inquired the management? If you do the recalculation is a procedure, right? But what evidence will you have in the file of recalculation? So there are many things, right? There are many things you do yourself. For example, something you do yourself is what? Inventory count. Something you do yourself is recalculation, which are all procedures currently. Recalculation. Something you do yourself is inquiry. Something you do yourself is observation of something. Something you do yourself is analytical procedures like ratio analysis. Now see, there are so many things in the audit where you do things yourself. But how will my manager know that I have done the recalculation? How will my manager gets to know I have done the inventory count? How will the manager gets to know I have done an inquiry? So what will be in my file? As simple as that, I will have results of inventory count. Results of inventory count means the documentation. This is the word the examiner used, right? Results. Results means obviously when you go to the inventory count, the auditor have the writing pad, and in the writing pad, the auditor notes things. So results is basically the notings you do on the writing pad. So in the exam paper, we write the word results, right? So anything which the auditor do automatically becomes results. A result means a piece of paper on which you have noted something. Results of recalculation. Results of recalculation. Results of observation, right? Results of analytical procedures. Results of analytical procedures. So if something is done by the auditor himself, and if someone of you is in the practical audit, the auditor do have their writing pads with them. And when they go to the field, they have the writing pad with them. So whatever they are discussing or whatever they are analyzing or whatever they are performing, they keep noting it down on the writing pad. The noting on the writing pad becomes the results, and the results goes to your file. Is that clear with everyone? Is everyone getting the sense of this exercise so far? And are you becoming clear with the exercise that when you're thinking about evidence, you're writing evidence, right? You're not writing a procedure. So you have to be very focused on that. Okay, perfect. Okay, now that has done the first question for us. We'll be getting directly to an exam paper, but let's see. We have done the type 1 so far. So in the type 1, the examiner was asking us comment on the matters. The matter means materiality, treatment, and risk, and explain the evidence. The evidence means something in the form of documents. And the evidence, if comes from the management, I'll say copy. But if the evidence comes directly from the third party, I'll not write anything. And if the evidence comes directly by auditor performing something, I'll simply say results of inventory count, results of recalculation, results of observation, results of analytical procedure, right? Now, just an example. Suppose you need to find evidence on a bank loan. You need to find an evidence on a bank loan and you have like 4 marks, right? Evidence on a bank loan and you have 4 marks. Just want to do an exercise because I want to criticize something which normally the student do and want to get you on track. Okay, now if you're gathering evidence on the loan and suppose you start writing in the exam paper and you say, okay, I'll take copy of the board minutes to confirm the approval of the bank loan and the rationale why the loan was taken from the bank. See, a lot of time the examiner says that you simply say copy of the board minutes. You never write what is the reason. Reason is very important. Even if you're writing a procedure, the procedure has to be with a reason. Why? When you're writing an evidence, I cannot say copy of the board minutes full stop. Examiner will not be generous giving me 1 mark. I have to say copy of the board minutes. Why? To confirm the approval of the bank loan and the rationale why the loan was taken from the bank. Second, copy of the loan agreement. to confirm the principal amount of loan and the attached covenants attached with the loan taken. Then I can have the results of recalculation to confirm the accuracy of the finance cost calculated on the loan taken. Now, obviously, loan, I have to see the classification of the loan. Has the loan been classified between current assets and non-current assets, right? Or whether the loan has been disclosed in the notes to the account. Now, will I write the word copy of the draft financial statement? Or will I say just the draft financial statements? Does it make sense to say copy of the draft financial statement? Or will I just be writing it directly, draft financial statements? What should I do? What's your suggestion? Will I say copy of the draft financial statements? No. Why? Because the financial statements are given to the auditor, right? Because that is the objective of the auditor. You cannot start the audit without the financial statement. So you cannot say copy of the financial statement, because financial statement is basically the subject matter of the audit. So it sounds very illogical that I say copy of the draft financial statement. So I directly say draft financial statement. Draft financial statements to confirm number one, the classification of the loan between current and non-current, and second, to confirm disclosure made are adequate. See the number 5. The number 5 will give you 2 marks, because the examiner says if you write one evidence which have 2 unique reasons, examiner will give you 2 marks for that. Draft financial statements to confirm 2 things: the classification of the loan between current and non-current, and the disclosure made are adequate. Okay, let me see the questions being raised. Can we use copy of recalculation rather than results? No, Ali Raza, because recalculation is something which has been done by the auditor, not management. You do recalculation, right? So results is a professional word. Stick to results. Okay, Shabrez, sir, sometime evidence is taken for more than a reason. Can we make 2 different points for different reasons? Yes, Shabrez, agree. Just see my point number 4. I took one evidence for 2 reasons. Draft financial statement, I have 2 reasons, and that's exactly what I was telling. If you write 2 reasons for one evidence, you will take 2 marks. Shabrez, is that clear? If you write one evidence with 2 reasons, that means 2 marks. Okay, it should be the draft financial statement. Okay, Kamal Hussain, you're perfectly right. Lisa, draft financial statements to ensure that the loan taken is reflected perfectly. That Lisa. Okay, so all of you are in consensus now, right? So see how I wrote evidence on a bank loan. Now, for example, a student goes to the exam hall and he needs to write evidence on a bank loan. And this is what the student do. Student do this in the exam hall. Instead of writing evidence, the student do this in the exam hall. I want to assure, okay, will you get marks or not? Student says, copy. Student do this first one rightly. I'm just copy pasting it. Control C, Control V. Done. When the student was writing the second point, the student mistakenly wrote, review the loan agreement to confirm whatever. He was writing a question on evidence, right? And mistakenly he wrote, review the loan agreement. Okay, he came to number 3, and mistakenly in the number 3 he wrote, recalculate. the finance cost to confirm something. And then in the fourth he wrote draft financial statement. Draft financial statements to confirm whatever. Now see, technically, out of the 4 points he wrote on evidence, 2 of them are technically evidence, right? 2 of them are technically evidence. Number 1 is evidence, right? And number 4 is evidence. Whereas number 2 and 3 are procedures. And he was writing this question for how many marks? 4 marks. Will he be rewarded the 4 marks? All of you will say no. Exactly. All of you will say no. And all of you will say that he will be rewarded 2 marks. Perfect. Because logically, the number 2 and number 3 is a procedure, right? Number 1 and 4 is the evidence. So all of you have a very clear track that the examiner would reward him maximum 2 marks. Now listen to something very carefully. Listen to something very carefully. Each year, or I think after every 2 years, there is an examiner conference which takes place in UK, and there is a question and answer session with examiner, the minutes of which are released later. There was a question and answer session with the P7 examiner, and in that question and answer session with the P7 examiner, a question was raised to the P7 examiner that what if, and let me write the question so that you know what question was raised and what answer the examiner gave. What if a student write a procedure when the question asked for evidence, right? That was the question. Secondly, it has been seen that when you is the examiner here, right? When you bracket examiner write an answer on evidence, you sometime write procedures even in the answer of evidence. If you have seen past papers, this is reality, right? It has been seen that when you as the examiner write an answer on evidence, you sometime write procedures even in the answer on audit evidence. So what if the student write a procedure when the question asked for evidence? Now see what the examiner answered. Be very careful because this can be so soothing for you in exam paper. The examiner answered in the conference, if a student write procedures when the question is on evidence, if the student writes procedure when the question is on evidence, the student would not be penalized harshly for that. The student would not be penalized harshly for that because there is a very thin line between procedures and evidence. Now, if I go back to the student who wrote 4 points and I look at the examiner question answer session, which has been done the last year. Now, as per the examiner answer, now the student will not get 2 marks, the student will get 4 marks. Are you getting my point? Because the student mistakenly wrote 2 evidences and 2 procedures. No, penalize softly, penalize harshly, Vakas, have a common sense. Penalize harshly means, would not penalize harshly means the examiner will give you reward for that. The examiner will give you credit for that. So if you say review the loan agreement when you should have said copy of the loan agreement, the examiner will still give you 1 mark. So it's not about softly, harshly, Vakas. It's more about this, the meaning of the examiner mindset is that he will give you credit for that. He will give you credit for that. No, it's not strange. Obviously it's not strange because this is a confusion, right? Because when you see the examiner answer, the examiner sometimes writes evidence and all of a sudden gets to procedure. And all of a sudden examiner writes procedure and he gets to evidence. And the student comes and asks, why is the examiner writing a procedure in a question on evidence? So examiner clarified that even if you do so, I'll not penalize you harshly. But if you stick to the rule which I just made at the beginning of the session, that is very, very good. But mistakenly, if you get off track, don't be worried about it. Is that clear to everyone? You should stick to the rule, because if you are clear on evidence and procedure, that's very good. So you should stick to the rule, all the attendees, right? But mistakenly, you were writing 5 evidences. And mistakenly you wrote 1 procedure. So will you be penalized harshly for that? Yes, Himraj, we are mentioning the source of evidence, right? If I say copy of the board minutes, I'm mentioning the source. Source is what? Source is the board minutes. I cannot understand your question. Obviously, copy of the board minutes means source of evidence. Board minutes is a source of evidence. Okay, let me get back to my question. So if you're writing 5 evidences and mistakenly you write 1 procedure, will you be penalized too harshly for that? No. But what is my first priority? My first priority is that I should stick to the segregation. But if in pressure and mistakenly I wrote 1 procedure and 4 evidences, I should not be worried about it, because the examiner is giving you generosity. He's saying, I'll not penalize you too harshly for it. Yes, Lisa. If you're writing 5 evidences and all the 5 evidences were with review, recalculate, you can do 1 and 2 mistakes, but you're going to do all 5 mistakes, right? So if you're writing 5 evidences and in all the list of 5 there is no single evidence, then you will be penalized harshly. I hope all of you are getting my track point. The track point is very clear. First of all, you will stick to the logics. If the question is on evidence, you will write evidence, right? If the question is on procedure, you will write procedure. But if you do a slightest mistake, instead of a procedure, you write evidence, and instead of an evidence, you write procedure, you will not be penalized harshly for it. But what is the fundamental? The fundamental is stick to the basics. Is that clear to everyone? Is that benefiting you? Is that examiner question answer benefiting you? So you obviously you should know the mindset of your examiner, and the mindset of the examiner is more closely connected with the platinum approved learning provider tutors, because you get to access these resources. Right, so is everyone clear with that? Should I go to the type 2 now? Okay, let's get with type 2. Okay, now I'm shifting to the column 2 now, right? The column 2 is the type 2 question, and the type 2 question comes very rarely in the past paper. But if it do comes, please be prepared for it. Let me change the color, otherwise you will get distracted. Okay, let's bring it to blue. Okay, type 2, right? Comment on the sufficiency. What we have to comment on now? We have to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence. Now, when the examiner asks you to comment, let me use the red color so that we have a segregation. When the examiner asks you to comment on the SAAE means sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, right? So when the examiner asks you to comment, on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, what exactly it means. And okay, just one thing I forgot. If I come back to the type 1, in type 1, every matter was worth 1 mark. Materiality 1 mark, treatment 1 mark, risk 1 mark. Sorry, I forgot to give you the marking scheme of evidence, right? Let me make that clear first and then come back on the list. When you're writing the evidence in the working paper file, each evidence is worth 1 mark. Each evidence is worth 1 mark. So each evidence is worth 1 mark. I forgot to give that. So every matter is worth 1 mark. Every evidence is worth 1 mark. So you know how much evidence to write. Okay, secondly, coming back to the column 2. In terms of the column 2, when the examiner says comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, what exactly it means? First, let's make the marking scheme clear. Every comment on SAAE is worth 1 mark. So every comment is worth 1 mark, right? Now, what exactly I have to comment on? I have to comment on whether the evidence gathered is sufficient and appropriate or not. Now, this is such an important jargon of audit, right? And all of you should be familiar with that coming from the F8 paper to P7 paper. This is such an important jargon. Even if I go back to the F1 exams, even in the F1 exams, students are introduced to what is an SAAE, what is a sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Okay, now let's see what it is. When the examiner asks you to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence, SAAE means, number 1, the evidence given in the case, the evidence given in the case may or may not be sufficient appropriate audit evidence. May or may not be sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So when the examiner asks you to comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, the comment can be in favor. The comment can be in favor of the evidence obtained. If you think the evidence obtained was right, you will comment in the favor of the evidence obtained. And the comment can be against the evidence obtained. So comment can be both ways, right? So if the examiner asks you comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence, then you can read the case very carefully. And if you think that the evidence in the case is not sufficient, then you will criticize it. Or if you think the evidence is not appropriate, you will criticize it. But if you think the evidence is sufficient, you will appreciate it. You will support it. Right? Now let's make some examples of what basically is sufficient and appropriate. And when you are reading the case, how will you know the evidence is sufficient, appropriate or not? Let's find some examples. Is everyone clear so far? I'm starting with examples of what makes evidence sufficient and appropriate, on which you need to do the comment. So in the type 2 question, we are not gathering evidence. Rather, in the type 2 question, we are commenting on the evidence, whether the evidence is sufficient or not, or whether the evidence is appropriate or not. Okay, let's start with some examples. If I look at some examples of SAAE, sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Number 1, evidence gathered by junior on risky areas. Will it be sufficient and appropriate? Will you criticize? Will you support? Will you criticize it? Will you support it? Attendees, I need your participation. Criticize. Perfect. Okay, so if the evidence is evidence gathered by the junior on risky area, you will criticize it. Second, evidence In the question it's written, only one sample was selected. So will you criticize one sample, or you will appreciate one sample? Is one sample sufficient? Criticize. Perfect. The question says, uh, existence of the fixed assets, existence of the fixed asset was not checked. Is that good? Is that bad? Existence of the fixed asset was not checked. Bad. Have I taken appropriate evidence? I've not taken appropriate evidence, right? Third, fourth, uh, only representation letter was obtained. Only representation was taken from the management. Nothing else was done in the audit. Can I only rely on the representation and I do nothing? Criticize, right? Because representation is the last resort. So I have to do something first, then rely on the representation. Okay, I've taken a verbal I have taken something in verbal form, not documentary. I've taken something in the verbal form, not documentary. Criticizable, right? Next, I take something which is like, for example, I've seen these blunt statements in past paper when the examiner says no evidence was gathered. Auditor didn't attended the inventory count. The auditor didn't intended the inventory count. See, so if he have not attended the inventory count, how would he know about the physical existence of the inventory? How will he know that whether there was inventory in the warehouse or not? So no evidence was gathered is a very blunt statement. Auditor didn't attend the inventory count. The auditor didn't send a confirmation letter to receivables. Didn't send a confirmation letter to receivables. Or the question says, auditor only checked the arithmetical accuracy. Auditor only checked the arithmetical accuracy of the impairment working. Can I only check the arithmetical accuracy of the impairment working, or should I do something on impairment working? Should I see how the management has determined the recoverable amount, or should I see how the management has determined the value in use? Should I see what assumptions has been taken by the management in the impairment working, or should I only check the arithmetical accuracy and say, okay, this is enough? Right? This is criticizable. So I hope you have a common sense in exam paper that when you are judging whether the evidence is sufficient and appropriate, you can judge it. It's very simple, I think. It's more simple than the type 1 question, that whether the evidence given, is it sufficient or not? If it is, support it, appreciate it. If it is not, criticize it. Still the same mark, 1. Right? Is everyone clear with those examples? As we do an exam paper, I'll give you more examples through the exam paper. Right? So every comment will give you 1 mark. Now, one last thing, right? This question on sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence, because you need to do a comment on the sufficiency. Now, this comment is very judgmental. This question is basically looking for your this question is basically looking for your judgment. So your judgment is very important, whether you believe the evidence is sufficient or whether you believe the evidence is not sufficient. So is the type 1 and 2 clear to everyone? In terms of the technical grounds, are you clear with the segregation of the type 1 and 2 question and the marking scheme? Okay, let's do a quick recap, and I'm going to the namaz break. Let's do a quick recap. If a question comes on type 1, for every matter, I'll get 1 mark, and for every evidence, I'll get 1 mark. But if the question comes on type 2, which says comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, for every comment, whether the comment is in favor or against, I'll get 1 mark. So is everyone mentally clear with the type of questions we'll start after the namaz break? And have you, has most of you been mitigated? Did you had some fear factors with this topic, or did you had some misunderstandings with this topic, which you think has been mitigated through this practice to pass session? So is your mindset very clear now for starting off an exam paper? Okay, so we'll start with the drafting, how to draft an answer on type 1. I'll do 1 half-an-hour exercise on drafting the type 1, 1 half-an-hour exercise on drafting the type 2. The questions have been uploaded in the document section along with the answers, which you can see at your convenience back at home, but I'll give equally half an hour to each question. We're taking a 10 minutes namaz break currently, and post namaz break, I'll start directly with the understanding of the type 1 question. So it's currently 6:55 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time. So approximately 10 minutes of break. So we'll be resuming by like 7:10 p.m. And from 7:10 p.m. I'll put equal time to type 1 and type 2 questions. Yes, Sarfaraz, every matter carries 1 mark, right? So technically it becomes 3. Materiality is 1 mark, treatment is 1 mark, risk is 1 mark. So 1 plus 1 becomes 3. Is that clear, Sarfaraz? Okay, let's get to the break. Okay, welcome back post namaz break. Now we're starting directly with the question on type 1 and type 2 on the basis of the understanding we got just prior to the break. So let's start with the first question. The first question that has been chosen to illustrate the type 1 and which is the most common type which comes in exam paper. If I scroll down, December 14, question number 2, right, is the one we are doing, which is basically the session question 1 in your handouts. If I go down and I see the requirements tell me that this is a type 1 question. It says comment on the matters and explain the evidence you should expect to find in the working paper file. So the question is directly asking the type 1. Right, so the question is asking comment on the matters and explain the evidence. So from that requirement, you can pick, okay, this is the type 1 question, and this is exactly where we have to write the matters, materiality, treatment, risk. And this is exactly the type of question where I have to write the evidence in the tangible form, the one we just discussed at the beginning of the day 3 today. Okay, so the examiner says the split of the marks is shown against each issue above. Each issue above. There are 3 issues above, right? And the split of the marks is shown against each issues. Let's see how many issues we have. All which issues? Accounting issues, right? Now the first issue carries 12 marks, right? The second issue carries 7 marks. Second issue carries 7 marks, and the third issue carries 6 marks. Now, within the 12 marks, within the 7 marks, and within the 6 marks, I have to do matters and evidence in the working paper file. Now, please be realistic. Examiner is saying that you have 12 marks for the part A, and you have to write matters and evidence in the working paper file. Now, how will you utilize the 12 marks? Is the examiner saying there are equal number of marks for matters and evidences? Is the examiner saying there are equal number of marks for evidences and matters? No. So should I write 6 matters and 6 evidences? No, because the examiner is saying you are free to do anything, but you have to do 2 things. Which 2 things? Matters and evidences. Now you do one more and one less, and the vice versa, you are still getting your 12 marks, because the examiner is not saying a cap. Examiner is not putting a cap. We even discussed that yesterday. So 12 marks, and the examiner is saying write matters and evidences. Yes, you can write more matters and less evidences. You can write less matters and more evidences. But you have to get how many marks? 12. And everything carries 1 mark. Right? See if I can do an illustration with you. Can you just read the part A quickly in 2 minutes? Just so that you get an idea. Only the part A, right? Only the part A from here to here. Can you just read it in 2 minutes? So I get back to the Word file and tell you how to write an answer. And please respond with that you have read it after 2 minutes, so I know that all of you are ready for me to start with the drafting exercise. Yes, I'll be sending the Word file but I'll be sending that in accumulation on Friday, which is the last day of the webinar. So I know a lot of you are very curious about this Word file. I'll be sharing that with you. Don't be worried about that. But it will be shared on Friday, which is the last day where we have a question and answer session. Okay, now assuming most of you have read the 12 marks requirement, so let's go down and see the Word file. If I go back to the Word file and I just show you a way of answering the type 1 question, we have to do the type 2 as well. So if I just start first with this type 1, okay, if I start with the type 1 drafting, I'm just doing it as an illustration for illustration. Which question am I doing? I'm doing the December 14 question, the question number 2, right? And the part A, which is for 12 marks. Okay, now having said that, I know I have to do two things, right? I have to write in terms of the part A, no color. In terms of the part A, which is, let me take the heading of the part A. The part A heading is 80% equity shareholding was acquired in the teapot company. So 80% equity shareholding was acquired in the teapot company. Okay, acquisition. So let's make the heading of part A, acquisition of teapot company. Okay, now I have how many marks for it? 12. Now I have to write matters, right? And I have to write evidence in working paper file. You can use these two subheadings, right? Whatever I'm doing on the Word file is whatever is something you can carry on in the exam paper, right? Okay, now under the heading of the matters, MTR, I'll say the goodwill on the acquisition of the teapot company. The goodwill on the acquisition of the teapot company, that is $27 million, is fill in the blank percentage of the total assets. You will divide it by the total assets, right? Is fill in the blank percentage of the total assets, thus material to financial statements, right? You got your 1 mark, full stop. You continue writing. However, it seems that the goodwill has not been reviewed for impairment as it is stated at the same value at the year end. However, it seems that the goodwill has not been reviewed for impairment as it is stated at the same value at the year end. I hope all of you know that once every year the goodwill should be reviewed for impairment, and we acquired the company in the last year. If you look at the dates given in the part A, so it's almost like 1 year since the acquisition. So however, it seems that the goodwill has not been reviewed for impairment as it is stated at the same value at the year end. Goodwill should be reviewed for impairment each year. Thus, if not reviewed, goodwill could be overstated, full stop. Now, goodwill should be reviewed for impairment every year. That is basically the accounting treatment, right? As per the accounting standards, the goodwill should be reviewed for impairment every year, right? And it has been held at the same value. So what's the risk? The risk is, thus, if not reviewed because we're not sure, goodwill could be overstated. 1 mark. So see, I wrote my MTR in one paragraph and I got 3 marks. Yes, Kesser Fayaz, Kesser, your answer is perfectly right. Exactly, fine. Both of your answers are right. Okay, so that is one paragraph, right? Where I discussed the materiality of the goodwill, the accounting treatment of the goodwill, and the risk of the goodwill. So MTR, I got 3. I changed the para. Let's see what is the second matter. The second matter was that I took a loan. I took a loan of $60 million, and the loan is to be repaid in 20 years at a premium of $5 million. Okay, for the acquisition, I took a loan. So I'll tell examiner the loan of $60 million taken to finance the acquisition is fill in the blank percentage of the total assets, thus material to the financial statements. Full stop. 1 mark. After the full stop, I'll say the premium on the loan should be amortized over the 20-year period as part of the finance. The premium should be amortized over the 20-year period, and if not amortized, will understate the finance cost, because your total finance cost for every year will be the amortization of the premium as well as the 5% markup, the 6% markup, the 6% markup and the amortization over the 20 years. And if not amortized, will understate the finance cost and overstate profit. So 1 risk, 1 mark, and treatment. 1 mark for treatment, 1 mark for risk. You can still write further. Moreover, the loan is for 20 years, so it should be classified under current liabilities and non-current liabilities. If loan is not rightly classified into, if the loan is not rightly classified, it could over or under state the current or non-current liabilities. It could be the case that the company put the whole loan in the non-current liability, whereas the 1 year of the loan should go into the current, and the remaining 19 years of the loan should go in the non-current. So what if the company puts the whole loan in the non-current? Then the current liabilities will be understated. And what if the management puts the whole loan in the current liability? Then the non-current liabilities will be understated. That is another treatment and a risk. The loan should be classified as the treatment, and the risk is thereafter. Yes, and the loan should also be discounted to the present value. It should be recognized at an amortized cost basis. See, there are so many treatments associated with the loan. No, Kamal. First you will write matters, then you will write evidences. Don't do the presentation you are asking me. No need to give the standard reference, Ali Raza. If you give them, you can. There is no mark for the reference. There is no mark for the reference, right? There is mark for the treatment. So you should write the treatment rather than the reference. But if you give reference, that's good. But the mark says for the treatment, not the reference. So see, if I stop here, even though there is a risk relating to the loan, that the loan should be recorded on an amortized cost basis, or the loan should be discounted to the present value. No, Himraj, no, not that presentation. That is exactly the same question Kamal was asking as well. So Himraj, not the presentation you were asking for. Do the presentation I'm doing currently. So see, I wrote one matter on the goodwill, I got 3 marks. Then I wrote loan is material, 1 mark. And then I wrote under an overstatement. So how many marks I got? 2 and 2, 4, 1, 5, and 3, 8. So on matters, I got 8 marks. So how many evidences will I try to complete my answer? Just 4 evidences. 1 evidence. The company acquired the teapot company. First, I'll say copy of the board minutes to confirm the rationale why the teapot company was acquired. Why the board gave the approval of this acquisition? What was the basic rationale behind this acquisition? To confirm the rationale why the teapot company was acquired. Second, copy of the purchase agreement. Copy of the purchase agreement to confirm the purchase consideration of how much was the purchase consideration? Yes, you can also make point on the fair value adjustment, Vakas, but again, the fair value adjustment, if you look at the value, is something very immaterial. So that is the reason I didn't touch upon the fair value adjustment. No, the purchase consideration, Lisa, is not $27 million. The purchase consideration, I think, is $75 million. Yes. So copy of the purchase agreement to confirm the purchase consideration of $75 million. Results of discussion to confirm whether the goodwill was reviewed for impairment or not. I should ask management whether they have tested the goodwill for impairment or not. So if I discuss with management, that is the procedure, right? So I say results of discussion to confirm whether the goodwill was reviewed for impairment or not. And then last, I'll say copy of the loan agreement to confirm the principal amount of loan and the conditions associated with the loan. And I made my 12 marks so quickly. Just under 7-8 minutes, I made my 12 marks. That is exactly the format of the answer. I tell my student, if you are good on the type 1 question, you can do it so efficiently because the evidence has to be written like a sentence. So the evidence can save so much time. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, done. But you have to write the reason. Can you see reason in my every evidence? To confirm, to confirm. Can you see this to confirm coming in every of my evidences? To confirm coming everywhere. So that's very important, right? That you have to write the reason. And see the matters. How quickly can you write matters? See the length of the matters. In one paragraph, I wrote the matters for goodwill, $27 million. So in one paragraph, I wrote the matters relating to $27 million, right? And in the second para, I wrote the matters relating to the loan of $60 million. So this is a very time efficient question, right? This is a very time efficient question. If you know this question well, this is such a scoring opportunity in P7. You simply write a materiality, a treatment, a risk. You take the second issue. Again, you write the materiality, treatment, and risk. And then you see out of the 12 marks, how many you have got. The remainder becomes evidences. Is everyone clear with the drafting style here? Are you getting the sense of writing the matters and evidences in the type 1 question? Okay, one last thing quickly in getting down to the type 2. Try to understand. See how I managed my 12 marks. In my 12 marks, I got 4 marks on evidence and I got 8 marks on meta. So this is how I made my equation. You can make your own equation. No need to write more, Kamal Hussain. Be professional. You're appearing for a professional level exams, and that too a P7 level exam, which is an optional paper. Write only what is to be written. Why you write if there are 12 marks, why will you write a 24 marks answer? You're wasting your time. Okay, see how I made my equation. 8 matters and 4 evidences is equal to 12. Now, can a student goes to the exam hall? Just need to illustrate one thing. Again, the examiner conference and the examiner question answer session. The student has to write matters. The student has to write evidences in working paper file. Matters and working paper file, right? Suppose the student write 12 matters and 0 evidence. The student write 10 matters and 2 evidences. The student write 10 evidences and 2 matters, right? Or let's take a very blunt another statement. The student write 0 matters and all 12 evidences. Let me ask you, and then I'll put the examiner comment with you. Yes, exactly. Sana Zahir, you can balance the equation you want to. You can balance the equation you want to. Yes, exactly, Lisa. That's my point. I'm illustrating the same point. And I have to share with you the examiner question and answer session as well. See, if I write 12 matters and 0 evidences, I'm still taking 12 marks. Simple mathematics, right? I write 10 matters and 2 evidences, I'm still taking 12 marks. I write 2 matters and 10 evidences, I'm still taking 12 marks. You have to make your 12 marks the way you want to make it. So even if I write 0 matter and 12 evidences, I am still getting 12 marks. Even if I write 12 matters and 0 evidences, I take 12 marks because the examiner is very clear on that. See what the examiner answered. This was a question asked to examiner. Question asked to examiner in which he responded very clearly. What if the student write all evidences and no matters, or vice versa? And see what the examiner responded. The examiner responded, there is no gap between evidence and matters. So even if a student do so, would not be penalized for it. However, it should not be encouraged. I hope the examiner statement is very clear. Is there any ambiguity? Examiner is very clear on his statement, provided you know how to read things, because that's another problem with P7 student. They reach P7 level and they don't know how to read the requirement and understand the exam requirement. So how will you understand what the examiner is saying? There is no cap between evidence and matters. So even if a student do so, would not be penalized for it. However, it should not be encouraged. So as a tutor, should I encourage that? No. I'll say write at least some evidences and some matters. So to me, if you ask me what's good for us, I'll say, okay, 12 and 0 is something very bad. I'll say, okay, 10 and 2, that's very good. I'll say 2 and 10, okay, that's very good. You can write something more and something less. You can write something more, something less, but you cannot write something zero, right? So if you ask my point of view would be, because the examiner is saying it's not encouraged, so I cannot encourage it. So what is my point of view is, you write something more, something less, and the vice versa. But don't write something zero. But even if you do so, will the examiner penalize you for that? So is everyone clear on that? So can you manage your 12 marks now in the teapot company the way you want to? Will that release your exam pressure? Will that release your exam pressure for the June exams? These are so easy questions, right? There are no caps. So when there are no caps, you be flexible. I fail to understand why the students are not flexible. Because when there is not a note written that the marks are equally divided, this note is not written, right? So be flexible. You are a manager in P7 paper. Do things on a flexible basis. Examiner is giving you an opportunity, but I fail to understand why you do not take the opportunity. Why you run after difficult things. When you have an opportunity to get the 50 marks, why are you not taking the 50 marks? You should take the 50 marks. That is so easy in P7. Technically, P7 is very easy if you know the techniques, you know the way of writing things down, you know the marking schemes. That is my unique selling point in P7. Know the marking scheme, know how much to write, know what the examiner likes, know what the examiner don't like. So be closer to examiner, be closer to examiner. And there are so many resources available on ACCA website you can access and be closer to examiner. ACCA supports you with resources, right? You have to be closer to those resources, use those resources, and ensure that you know the mindset of your examiner. I hope that's clear with everyone. I'm getting down with drafting of the type 2 now. Rest my answers is with you, and you can read my answers and see how I have drafted the remaining answer on type 1. I'm going down to the type 2. Is everyone clear now? Any confusions, any misunderstandings still existing? Yes, Jokong, agree with your answer. Okay, let's start with the type 2. Okay, if I go down and we start writing a type 2 answer, drafting a type 2 answer, right? Drafting a type 2 illustration. Again, the complete answer is given. I'm just taking an illustration. Even though I've written the answers, I'm still writing it for you just to demonstrate. Otherwise, I could have just put the Word file in front of me and start reading it. But I thought that would not make sense. Let's draft and deliver so that you get the good benefit of understanding. Okay, let's see the type 2. December 16 exams, and I'm using the December 16 exams question number 2 as the type 2 question. Now you go down and see the type 2 requirements. See the first requirement. In respect of the 3 matters described above, comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence obtained. Was that something told to you in my lecture today? Comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence obtained. So was that part of my lecture? Right? Second, tick. Second, in this question, the examiner is asking you some more things. He's saying comment on the matters, comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence, and then he's saying recommend procedures to be performed by the audit team. Recommend procedures to be performed by the audit team. So he's not asking evidence, right? He's asking what? He's asking procedures, right? Procedures. And what are procedures? Procedures has to start with verb. I just illustrated that, right, at the beginning of the session today. In the third requirement, the examiner says explain the matters and the student thinks, oh, I got a question MTR. You're off track. You cannot be in hurry in exam paper. You think the sir told me in the webinar, explain the matter. Matter means MTR. I got my answer. And you rush and you come out of the exam hall, and when you discuss your answer with your friend, you thought, I have done a biggest blunder. See what is the question saying? It's saying explain the matters which should be included. Examiner is specifying that. Which matters? Which should be included in the report in accordance with ISA 265, communicating deficiencies in internal control systems. So which matters? Matters relating to deficiencies in internal control systems. Matters relating to deficiencies in internal control system. So I should find the deficiencies from the question, right? Wherever I find a deficiency, I should be communicating the deficiency to those charged with governance. I hope all of you are clear with the requirements. The first requirement is the one we discussed today in the day 3. The second is a very simple requirement asking the student to write procedures. And the third says explain the matters which relates with deficiencies in internal control system. So obviously when I read the case, I'll get to know the deficiencies in the internal control system. The good thing with this question is comment on the sufficiency is 1 mark. Procedure is 1 mark. And every deficiency you explain is 1 mark. So whatever you do, you're getting 1 mark. Is the examiner saying marks are equally divided between each part? Is the examiner saying marks are equally divided between each part? 1, 2, 3? Is that the case so? No. So can I be flexible again? I can be. So how many things I have to do? 3 things. So in 3 things, I can be flexible, right? Because everyone has the marking scheme of 1. Now let's go up and see. Let's do one illustration for the session today. And then you can see rest of my answers. Okay, see, I'm looking at the B part. Considering the time factor, you can see rest of the answers. Read the B part quickly. Just under 2 minutes, read the B part. Let's plan the answer. Read the B part for 7 marks. You have to do 3 things, right? Comment on the sufficiency. Rizwan, no. You can quote the ISA or IAS or the IFRS, but the content has to be right. The marks are not given just for quoting. The marks is given for the content. So your content has to be right. You quote the wrong ISA and you quote the right content. So you're sending a very bad impression. Is that clear, Rizwan? Okay, has everyone read the B part, capital expenditure? No, you don't lose marks for not quoting right, Rizwan. Be very clear on that. Quoting is just an impression, right? You want to, you don't want to. Okay, let's start writing the capital expenditure. How many marks we have for capital expenditure? 7. You can see my answer on the Word file, how I have written in the para form. But just to save my time and to illustrate you, I want to show you one thing in the column form. How many things we have to do in this question? 3. First, comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of evidence. Second, procedures. And third thing I have to do is deficiencies. Deficiencies in internal control system. Okay, procedures. Please, obviously columns, I'm just making columns to make things clear quickly. You can see the format of drafting in my Word file. Now, what part I'm doing? I'm doing the December 16 question number 2B. Question 2B is what I'm doing in the session. And I have how many marks for capital expenditure? I have 7 marks for capital expenditure. 7 marks. And again, there is no cap. There is no cap. And for every comment, I'll take 1 mark. For every procedure, I'll take 1 mark. And for every deficiency, I'll take 1 mark. Okay, I start reading the case. Let's see how we fill in the columns. Okay, if I go back to the case. When auditing the company's capital expenditure, the audit team selected a material transaction to test and found that the controls over the expenditure were not operating effectively. The audit team selected a material transaction. Is that sufficient? Is that sufficient? A material transaction? A means 1. So the audit team selected a material transaction. Is that a sufficient evidence to conclude that the controls are effective? How can I conclude on one sample controls are effective or not? It might be a sampling risk that the sample I got was a wrong sample. So it's not sufficient, right? So I go back to my Word file and I say one sample is not sufficient to conclude whether controls are effective or controls are ineffective or not. So 1 mark. You can see the way to write in my Word file. Again, I'm discussing that again and again, but this is I'm just making a skeleton to show you the 7 marks here. So the first line is telling me that I took 1 sample, and on that 1 sample, I concluded that the controls are not effective. So 1 sample is not sufficient. No, please, I'm using the columns for illustration. The proper way of answering question is in my Word file, is in the file attached with the documents. Is that clear to everyone? Columns are not to be used in exam paper. Columns are not to be used in exam paper. I'm only using columns to show you the 7 marks. Clark, is that clear? Okay, you do, a lot of attendees do raise questions, but they don't respond when I say, is that clear? Okay, leaving that aside, let's go back to the question. Okay, select our material transaction, right? Authorization, next line. Authorization had not been obtained for orders placed for several vehicles. Is that a control weakness? Authorization has not been obtained for vehicles, and appropriate segregation of duties were not maintained. Appropriate segregation of duties were not maintained. So are there deficiencies in the controls? 2 deficiencies, right? One deficiency is no authorization. No authorization. And the second deficiency is no segregation of duties. See how to explain them in my answer. But 2 deficiencies means 2 marks. So far we are standing at 3 marks. I found 1 sufficiency problem. I found 2 deficiencies. See, I'm going in the order of the case and I'm filling my columns. Okay, let's go back. The audit team noted the details of the internal control deficiencies. The audit team noted means black and white. The audit team noted details of the internal control deficiency, which is good. Obviously, when you find a deficiency, you should note it down, which is very good. And updated the system notes on the permanent file to reflect the deficiency. Do we update the system notes on the permanent file to reflect the deficiency? Does the deficiency, is the deficiency permanent, or is the deficiency something which relates to the current year? Should I write the deficiency in my current file or in my permanent file? I cannot write the deficiency in my permanent file because the deficiency will be resolved. So where I noted the deficiency, I noted the deficiency in the current file, sorry, in the permanent file. So is that inappropriate on part of the auditor? Should I comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness? Was that appropriate? Source where I recorded it should be in the current file, right? And let's go back. The permanent file is inappropriate. The permanent file is inappropriate source to document the evidence. The permanent file is inappropriate source to document the deficiency. To document the deficiency in internal control systems. So I used the wrong source. I should have documented it in the current file, but I used the permanent file, which is an inappropriate source to document the deficiency in internal control system. Yes, Cephala, obviously when you find a deficiency in internal control system, the deficiency relates with the current year, right? You cannot record the deficiency in the permanent file. The permanent file is something which goes on and on and on. So obviously we recorded the deficiency in the permanent file, which was the big mistake on part of the auditor. So have I done the appropriate recording? No, I have not done the appropriate recording. I should have done the appropriate recording by recording it in the current file. So another 1 mark. Okay, let's go back and see what else I have done. Okay, the audit team noted details of the internal control deficiency. To note details, is that good? To note detail, is that good? Yes. So audit team noted details, but where they documented it, they documented that in the permanent file, which was wrong. So noted details, is that an appropriate evidence? So when you found deficiency, you noted the deficiency, right? So you can appreciate that. You can appreciate that. Okay, the audit work completed on this order. On this order means the single order, one transaction. The audit work completed on this order. This order means the sample I chosen. One sample I chosen, right? The audit work completed on this order was to agree the purchase of the vehicle to purchase invoice. What I did, I agree the purchase of the vehicle. I agree the purchase of the vehicle to where? To the purchase invoice and to the cash book. Is that sufficient? Should not I have verified the physical existence of the vehicle? I hope everyone knows that for a tangible asset, physical existence is very important. I didn't check the physical existence. Right? I only checked the purchase invoice. What will the purchase invoice tell me? The cost of the vehicle? Or the purchase invoice will tell me I have a right, I have the ownership. But will the existence of the vehicle be confirmed from the purchase invoice and the cash book? So I have another insufficient evidence. What insufficient evidence? Vehicles, existence of the vehicles were not verified, which is inappropriate evidence. I should test the right assertion, right? Yes, exactly, Farooq. You can, but that is in the last column, right? The examiner is asking what deficiencies will you communicate to the management. So we are communicating the deficiencies in the last column. So I'll not write that in terms of criticizing because I'm communicating them in the last column. So what is the first comment? The first comment is one sample is insufficient. The second column is I recorded it in the permanent file. The third comment is existence of the vehicles were not verified, which is inappropriate evidence. How many deficiencies I got? 2. No authorization and no segregation of duties. So how many marks I am left with now? How many marks am I left with now? 2. So where should I put the 2 marks? In which column? Procedures. Procedures on what? Procedures on capital expenditure. Procedures on vehicle. Now, I have tested the purchase invoice, so I'll not retest the purchase invoice because the examiner is saying further procedures. Further procedures. So see what procedures will I write. Number 1, inspect the vehicles, physically inspect the vehicles at the company's premises, because I've not done that. Physically inspect the vehicles at the company's premises. So should I check the vehicles at the company's premises because I did that? And second, have I done the depreciation recalculation of the vehicles? Can I discuss the useful life of the vehicles with the management as a procedure? Discuss useful life. Or can I recalculate the depreciation of the vehicles? Recalculate the depreciation charge on vehicles? Because I'm working on the capital expenditure. I'm working on the capital expenditure. Yes, exactly, Kesar, you can write any of those procedures, right? But see, I tell my students that comment on the sufficiency is in the case study. You read the case and you found the comment on the sufficiency, right? Then deficiencies is in the case. You read the case and you found your deficiencies. Procedures is the balancing figure. Procedure is the balancing figure. I found 3 comments. I found 2 deficiencies. So procedure became balancing. So in the exam paper, keep procedure as a balancing figure. Because the column 1 will come from the case study, right? Everyone agrees with that. The column 1 will come from the case study. I have to read the case for the column 1. And I have to read the case for the column 3. Column 1 and column 3 will come from the case. So once I know how many marks have been taken, yes, exactly, Rida Tausif, the answer is in the case. How will I find the deficiencies? Examiner will tell me the deficiencies, right? Then only I'll find the deficiency. So is that clear to everyone that the column 1 and the column 3 has to be filled first? And then I know my balancing mark. So in the balancing marks, I can write the procedures. See how I balanced my 7 marks. Is everyone clear on the balancing of the 7 marks? So is that something difficult to be done in exam paper? Yes, Farooq, there are no caps. So if there would have been caps, I would have written everything equal. I didn't wrote anything equal here. I wrote 3 comments, 2 deficiencies, 2 procedures. But there were no deficiencies. So how will I take more marks from deficiencies? Farooq, I'm putting a question to you. There were only 2 deficiencies. So the maximum marks I can score on deficiencies is how much? 2. And comment on the sufficiency. There were only 3 comments in the case. How can I write the 4th comment? Yes, we can write more procedures. We can write more procedures. Agree with that. But that is exactly my equation, right? Balance your 7 marks the way you want to. That has been the learning of the day today. That has been the learning of the day today. That you have to get 7 marks the way you want to get them. The way you want to get them. Is that clear, Farooq? Yes, Saifullah, see my answer which has been given to you through the documents uploaded by ACCA. You can see my answer of this question properly and see how to present the answer. Is that clear with everyone? Okay, one last thing to recap. The day 3 today, just the quick last 1 minute I have. Key learnings of day 3. Number 1, each matter is worth 1 mark. MTR. I hope all of you remember that. 2, each evidence is worth 1 mark in the working paper file. Number 3, Each comment on the sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence is worth 1 mark. Fourth, even if writing evidence, you mistakenly write a procedure, you would not be penalized too harshly for it, right? Yes, Shabrez, you should start writing the answer once you recognize the points. Fifth, examiner answer contain procedures. 2, in an evidence answer, that is just a guidance. I have discussed all these 5 points with you during my lecture or session today. I hope these 5 learnings on the screen in front of you is just a summary of the session we had today. I hope you had a beneficial session today, and I hope the session today must have mitigated your confusions you have on this topic on evidence within the limitation of the time and within the limitation of the session. I hope everyone has benefited from the session today, and you must have got some clarity. But again, you have to practice now. You have to practice the same at your end to assure that you are implementing exactly what you learned today. Okay. Thank you very much for being part of the webinar today. We'll be meeting tomorrow for the 4th day, and the objective of the 4th day is a very important topic, which is reporting. So tomorrow we'll be drafting reporting, which is the question 5 of the P7 exams. So I'll meet you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Allah Hafiz.